Welcome to this is our part of our Scaling Skills speaker series where we get business experts in and talk to us about how to optimize scaling businesses and enjoying life along the way. I'm Terry Dockery. Y'all know that. People call me Doc. It makes me Dr. Doc Dockery. Be aware that we're recording. Mute yourself if you're not asking a question to minimize background noise. And then ask questions anytime. Brian, that's the way we want to do it, right? We want people to join in anytime.
That's great.
So we're in the middle of our high performance CEO and owner roundtable. This is part of that program. It's a fine group of leaders, and we're all lifting each other up to have more fun, make more money, and do more good. So, let me know if you want information about membership or think you know somebody who might benefit. So our speaker today, I am delighted to say, is information technology consultant Ryan Johnson. And the title of our discussion is Data Engineering, What's Your End Game? And you might find it interesting. Most of you guys already know that Ryan is a multi-instrumentalist in the band Sons of Sailors, the Jimmy Buffett tribute band. And as far as I can tell, he plays every instrument known to mankind. So he's fun to play music with. Welcome, Ryan.
Great to be here. It's nice to see familiar faces. Seth, Mac, great to connect with you guys online. Great to see you. Hope that in this meeting and in other abilities to touch base beyond here, that we get that opportunity. So great to meet up with you.
So, Ryan, let me just start. Tell us a little bit about your background, which candidly I don't know a lot about either.
Yeah, my background has been largely in IT, in particular in the area of data management. And I've been doing that for a little over 30 years. I started out as a software developer, back-end software, web pages, a lot of that type of front-end work. As the need for data and data-driven applications came about, I got more into that and took over groups within organizations that I was working in that specialized in that. And that became the real cornerstone of what I was able to learn and take forward in my professional career. For the last 5 years, I've been doing consulting, independent consulting, which has been terrific. Had great connections there from prior lives that have afforded me great opportunities. Prior to that, I was able to work with a couple of companies to get them turned around. They were really in rough shape with regards to organization, getting processes in place to handle data integration, implementations, and was able to help or be a part of a team, not just by myself, but be part of teams that were able to get those organizations turned around. So one of them eventually sold and did very, very well. And the other one was in a situation of really being ready to close their doors. But we were able to restore a lot of client faith with things that we put in place, and that was incredibly rewarding. So in the last 5 years, that's something I've also been able to carry over into the consulting world and help out there. In addition to being successful, being parts from some projects that have had some shortcomings also have learnings, as everybody knows. It's great to tout your successes and what you learn from those or what you're able to show from those. But I've been a part of a few where there have been some things and some gaps that have surfaced during the process, some absolute failures to do things have caused issues, and they've either caused delays of the project or just a project to abort, period, because you needed to revisit and restart things so that you foundationally got things in place. So when Terry and I were talking about discussion points today, I thought that both the successes and some of those opportunities where there were shortcomings that you had great learnings from might be good to discuss with the team here.
Yeah, don't hold back, Ryan. Well, I mean, and we said, what a couple of great successes and what great quote failures, but learning opportunities. What would you say?
We had, I had mentioned where we had, where I was put in charge of the data management and data integration of one particular organization where it was super critical. This was a healthcare organization that did medical chart review for risk adjustment opportunities with Medicare and for their HEDIS, what they call HEDIS quality scores for their medical insurance ratings that they had for HMOs, Medicaid HMOs, Medicare HMOs in particular. There were very few processes in place that surrounded how not only technically you integrated a client, but also from a business standpoint, key, very rudimentary needs, having them documented and having those passed forward into the process. When we were able to sit and note and whiteboard, what are all the things that we really need to do to get a client on board and get them on the system successfully? Wrote those down, decided what kind of workflow paths that we would need, what kind of documents and sign offs we would need for each of those. None of them were really rocket science, none of them. And it was amazing how that kind of rudimentary simplicity, when it was applied to the process, how smoothly things went. And that organization went from chronic headaches and chronic, I would say almost screaming between departments to smooth quiet through the entire process. And it also restored an enormous amount of client faith in what we were doing. Many times I have discovered that the client is actually asking you, begging you for guidance. They want that guidance. They want you to tell them what can you do to help make us successful instead of leaving things to chance. And that's what that organization had really been doing historically. It was very rewarding. That organization ended up selling to a much larger health care organization. And much of that was attributed to what was done between the data integration team and the operations team to smooth those processes out. I was able to go to another organization, same line of business that had the same problems. So we almost were able to cookie cut exactly what was done from one over to the other because the problems were almost the same.
Right. Is
Um,
there okay, so most of us with IT, we start off with do it yourself to try to keep costs down, et cetera, et cetera. Is there some point in the growth of a business where all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but they find themselves kind of over their heads in terms of, and now they've got a bunch of stuff cobbled together that's not working well because they don't have the expertise to make it work well together. Is there a point in the business
well, I think
growth where that typically happens?
there is, and I think a lot of it is rooted in that very genesis point of make sure that that you have clarity around what you are trying to accomplish and all the details around what you're trying to accomplish. What I have found in multiple situations, including one later on after I left that last health organization, went to work with another one that did voice translation from media and metadata, tying metadata to those processes. What you found is technical people, and I'm one of them, are almost like guitarists in bands, and Mac and Seth, you'll have to indulge me for just a moment with regards to a musical reference. But guitar players tend to like to talk about their gear and their amps and their guitars and their toys. But then you get them in the middle of a band situation, you discover they're really not that great of a player because they don't have the set list. They haven't listened to the songs. They haven't prepared. They haven't practiced, but they got all this gear. Technical people, a lot of the times, are not far removed from that. We like to talk about our cloud engineering classes we took. We like to talk about what all we've done on Azure, what all we've done on AWS, what all we've done on Google, rather than saying, well, what are we trying to achieve? And then decide the technical path that you need to follow.
That's
That is
like
where
I do a lot of strategic planning, but we always start with the end goal, right? Where is it? Start with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey said, and then we plan backwards about how we're going to get there. Is that what you're saying?
that is how you should plan. Not necessarily how I have seen people plan before. And again, I'll go back to the guitar analogy, being a guitar player. You go out and buy a bunch of guitars and a bunch of equipment and what have you, and it's electric guitars by Gibson and Fender and Marshall amps, only to discover when you show up the gig, they just needed you to play some bluegrass. And all you needed was an acoustic guitar. That's what I've seen a lot of the time, in particular with IT leads. And I've worked with a lot of CIOs and CTOs. They've been my peer level at organizations where a lot of the time they have a great handle, great, a lot of oratory around those skills and those environments without really making sure they had their arms around what you were trying to accomplish from a business. That is, I mean, those are some things where I've been able to go into an organization, assist with some very, very positive outcomes. Some things I have learned myself is when you have leadership within certain organizations that either haven't done it, won't do it, or, and this is key, they put the wrong people in decision making capacities with regards to having to make those kinds of decisions, whether it's inexperience, whether it's just stubbornness. Sometimes you encounter that. Very common to encounter both of those. A project that I worked on for the last 6 months of last year up in Columbus, Ohio, was a case of that. Now, in that situation, there wasn't a single bad person on that team, not one. They were all good people, but many of them were inexperienced around knowing the value of doing what I had mentioned. They were wanting to, as I sometimes I refer to it, they wanted to have all of the sexy bells and whistles described, talk about those things because those things have more flash than saying, hey, let's have a good itemized list and project plan around what we need to accomplish. That project ended up hitting an impasse where they had to stop, revisit, and decide, were the contractors and consultants in place, even the ones were they even the ones that were needed? Well, that discovery was made as this is not really what you need to do. But by that point, an enormous amount of money and time had been spent that you can't recover. And as an executive, when you go into those meetings and you've already spent, and I'm putting this number out randomly, not related to that project, but it was a lot. See, it's $1 million that you've spent in resources, technology, contractors, and then having to go back to the well and say, well, that's not exactly what we needed to do. We sure would love another million. Matter of fact, we think we're going to need 1.5 million this time. That's not an easy conversation. I've sat through them and they hurt. And there is you lose the faith of the people you're asking for that money.
Ryan,
So
I thought that was the business model for the industry. Um, when I think it was almost in the same year. This had to have been 20 years ago, maybe 2004, 2005. I think within the same year, I came across, I was working with two clients who both told me at different times that we're going to have to hold off because we're dealing with a crisis that is existential to our business. And I asked them, well, can you tell me what that is? And both of them said within 8 months of each other, Well, we're going through an enterprise-wide software conversion with SAP, and it has gone horribly wrong. And I was like, okay. And what I found out later on was, yeah, it took them to the brink of just breaking the company. Everything was just broken. But the answer was to pay SAP three times as much as the budget to get solutions two or three times over to fix what had been broken in this. And I said, that's a hell of a business, man, because they got you at that point. It seemed like is that yeah. Going back to what you said earlier, I've been a part of lots of mistakes, and you learn through the mistakes. And it's like, well, somehow they manage to stay together and get through it. But it must be stressful.
It definitely is. And Mac, you're exactly right. Um, it seems more the norm than not. Uh, and I haven't really understood why it's accepted that much. If you're a sports fan at all, and regardless of what the sport is, we'll take football, for example. Before a play starts, you meet and you have a huddle with your 11 players. And you call that play twice, and then you break. And everybody in that huddle has a job. And, the guards and the tackles have their blocking scheme. The tight end knows the route they're supposed to run. The quarterback knows what receivers he's going to be looking at and in what order. And everybody knows that play. We fail to do that a lot in IT, even over the simplest of things. And I'll give you a perfect example where we recovered, fortunately, when I was working with an organization that did voice translation. We would take calls. We would take these calls. We would ingest all of this call media and have associated metadata that was tied to these calls. And all of these analytics were done on the voice recordings, sentiment scoring, all kinds of things, or text translations were done. That particular organization had created a very simple rudimentary process to do some simple data ingests and some simple ingest of media and tying it to that metadata. This is before I got there. What they decided to do was take something that was half baked and then integrate it into one of the biggest clients they had, which made no sense at all. You don't do that. They didn't get together in a huddle and call and have a playbook to say, this is where this product stands. And this is a case in a situation where we believe we could employ it and it could be successful. If we had bumps along the way, we could quickly remediate those. They threw this thing into the fiery furnace right from the get-go, and it was a disaster. When they decided, okay, we're going to take a simpler client implementation, we're now going to take that box, we'll call it. We're going to do everything that we need to do, work out any bugs we've done in unit testing and short-term integration testing, and we're going to apply it here, work out every kink, get that thing oiled up like you needed to get it oiled up. They were then able to then expand on what they had learned from that integration, add a few more bells and whistles, and then keep adding it to smaller integrations. Once they decided, here's our play and here's the huddle, we're going to call this play in the huddle, and everybody knows what we're going to do and what we're trying to achieve, they started being successful with it. And they just wrote something, created a toy, and hurled it in with absolutely very little end goal. And it was just a mess. And the client was never happy with what was done. So,
Well, Ryan, I have a question.
yeah,
So in my business, sometimes I run into this problem. Well, people will call you, they won't help, but they say, we figured out what our problem is. We want you to fix this. And my position has always been the diagnosis is the most important part. of the project. You know, you need to be, hopefully you're fixing the right problem. Does that, I bet that happens to you, where they say, you know what, we've decided we need X, Y, and Z, and we just need you to make it happen, as opposed to you looking at the system and how it's working together.
That is very, very true, Terry. And I know that not one solution fits everything. I'll use the analogy of, are we in a MASH unit or are we in a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon type situation? Is somebody about to lose a leg? Do we have that kind of urgency on solving a problem? Do we need to get that leg stitched up, get all the vessels, tie back nerves and everything, and just get it reattached? We're not going to really worry about what it looks like at the moment. Let's make sure we get it functional. We don't lose function. Or is this an application that needs a brow lift or Botox injections or something like that to pretty it up a little bit? Analyzing and diagnosing and isolating, detailing out what you need to accomplish deems what path you take in order to resolve those issues. So you're absolutely right. So, when I look back at where there have been shortcomings in projects that I've worked on and been a part of, they almost always go back to the same issue: is lack of clarity around what you were trying to accomplish and as many details as you needed to try to accomplish your end goal. There's always going to be misses. There's always going to be discovery. But I think if you do a pretty good job of that along the way, any refactoring or remediation you need to do along the way is much, much simpler. I'll give you a perfect example where I was a guilty as charged early in my career. And God rest his soul. The last story I'll tell about him, he was a PM for my team. He was my peer level, and I was a senior developer on an effort where we were doing patch releases every month routinely. We'd get a lot of stuff in. And he had a unbelievable list that he kept. And to this day, I still use that template and that manifest for accomplishing things, because you can step it off, check it off, make comments around your findings. And I remember telling him on more occasions than I could ever tell you, that's just a small thing. Don't worry about modifying your script. He would stop the meeting, insert another line, and he would insert what needed to be done. I know why he did it. And he called me out on it every time. He was a dear friend of mine, and he passed away while he was one of my colleagues, while he was working with me. And it was just a terrible thing. But his legacy with me is those details are important. If they were important enough for you to call out in this meeting, let's get it on the script. It only takes another second to get it down there. And 99% of the time, he was dead right, because you ended up checking that thing off, and it was a critical item that you were able to see the next time you did that patch release. It became part of your template. You grew that template. So those details are important. They've been important to have them together when we've been very successful, but they have also kind of foreshadowed your fate if you didn't have those things together.